The market was a riot of sound and color. A tangle of neon signs flickering in alien scripts, the clatter of hovering carts, and the occasional hiss of a robot vendor trying to argue over pricing with a customer who had 3 arms and a particularly sharp sense of sarcasm. Among the chaos, a small table had been set up, wobbly and precarious, with a lone cake sitting on it, its frosting glimmering in zero-gravity sparkles that refused to settle, floating up in tiny motes above its surface. At the table sat Leora, a little alien girl whose face could almost have passed for human if one ignored her long, expressive ears, which twitched constantly, betraying every flicker of emotion. Her eyes were wide and clear, staring at the cake as if it held the secrets of the universe, or at least the meaning of why everyone hates birthdays for her species. We don't have the proper, frosting for this species," a baker mumbled, backing away like Leora had just sprouted an extra head. He clutched a spatula as if it were a shield. The cake floated slightly, ignoring gravity, and the candle on top flickered in defiance. Maybe try again tomorrow." Leora's ears drooped and her tiny shoulders slumped. A low, soft whimper escaped her. She poked the floating cake with a finger, and the frosting danced around her touch like liquid light, teasing her disappointment. She had been looking forward to this, had practiced her wish carefully, and now she was left with a cake that refused to obey the simple rules of existence, or so it seemed. Jax, who had been leaning against a nearby hover lamp pretending to calibrate it, couldn't help but watch. At first he thought, not my problem. Little alien girl birthday cake crisis, probably common in the galaxy, right? But then one of her ears flicked upward, almost like a question mark of pure innocence, and his chest tightened in a way that humans apparently refer to as responsibility or morality. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Excuse me," he said, waving at the baker. "I'm allergic to sadness in children. It's very dangerous, could cause uncontrollable giggling or worse, sudden maturity." The baker blinked at him. You want to make the cake?" "I think I can try," Jax admitted, trying to sound confident while secretly wondering if he could even identify edible frosting, let alone interstellar frosting. "I've never baked an alien cake before, but I once made a perfectly mediocre pancake that almost achieved sentience. Close enough, right?" Leora tilted her head, her ears flicking with curiosity. "You can make it float?" she asked. "Well," Jax said, holding his hands up, "I was thinking of letting gravity do some of the work, for dramatic effect." He grinned, and Leora's first tiny smile broke through, ears twitching like excited antennas. That smile was enough to rally the bystanders, who began murmuring support. A few children of various species clapped enthusiastically, one floating a little because their gravity boots were malfunctioning, and a small hovering drone rolled over, projecting confetti from a nozzle that clearly had no idea what a birthday was. The baking began in chaos and laughter. Jax carefully measured quantities of glowing flour that shimmered in the wrong wavelengths for humans but seemed perfect for Leora's species. Every so often, the frosting would levitate from the bowl and drift around the table, forcing Jax to duck and wave it back down like a hapless conductor of a chaotic symphony. Leora tried to help, waving her ears dramatically whenever the frosting misbehaved. At one point, she giggled and accidentally sent a spoon spinning into a passing drone, which responded by projecting a holographic image of a tiny dragon that sneezed sparkles all over Jax's hair. He laughed, brushing sparkles out and muttering, "I am officially allergic to glitter, but I'll survive." Other market-goers began chiming in, offering strange ingredients and bizarre advice. A tentacled alien suggested hyper-quantum sprinkles, while a robot insisted that frosting must first be scanned at 12,000 Hz to prevent existential collapse. Jax nodded along with a straight face, muttering, "Of course, I always calibrate frosting frequency before bedtime." Leora cackled, her ears bouncing with each laugh, and for the first time that day, the cake stopped being a threat and started being a promise. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and 37 seconds, the cake was complete. It hovered just above the table, glowing softly in rainbow hues, adorned with frosting that shifted gently in patterns that seemed to tell tiny stories, and candles that burned without consuming themselves. A marvel of human improvisation and alien science. Leora clapped her hands, sending a ripple of excitement through the room. Her ears bounced, twitched, and even curled in ways that made Jax snort with laughter. Go on, Jax said, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. Make your wish. But remember, wishes work best if you're vague about the laws of physics. Leora closed her eyes tightly, pursed her lips, and whispered something that sounded like a mix of song and promise. The candle flared once, then steadied, and the frosting shimmered as if acknowledging the wish. She opened her eyes, her ears bouncing wildly, and for a moment everything was perfect. The market seemed to cheer with her, the drones danced, and even the grumpy baker smiled, muttering, "Well, maybe not a disaster after all." Jax leaned back against the wobbling table, exhausted but exhilarated. "Next time," he said, waving at the hovering cake, "we try anti-gravity ice cream, less mess, slightly more chaos." Leora giggled again, bouncing in her chair so high her feet hovered above the floor, and her ears quivered like spring's wound too tight. Around them, the market was still alive with noise and clatter. But for a single moment, the absurdity of interstellar life, the chaos of floating cakes and malfunctioning drones, and the improbable kindness of one human made the galaxy feel like the best place in the universe. And in that moment, Jax realized that he had not just helped bake a cake. He had helped build trust, laughter, and a bond that could bridge species. Leora's ears twitched happily as she leaned forward, trying to catch one of the drifting, frosting motes on her tongue, and Jax muttered, "Well, kiddo, welcome to birthday history. And maybe, just maybe, to friendship history too." The cake wobbled, floated, and glimmered. The market roared its approval. And somewhere in the midst of intergalactic chaos, a small alien girl had just discovered that birthdays, even for her species, could be magical. The next morning, the market was buzzing louder than ever, though this time with a different energy. Word of Leora's birthday victory had spread like a comet streaking through the sector. A little alien girl's first cake had become a viral sensation across multiple star systems. Hollow billboards flashed her smiling face, her ears twitching wildly, next to captions in a dozen languages, some of which humans couldn't even pronounce without causing minor tongue explosions. Jax, who had survived the first day without being turned into frosting himself, tried to navigate through the crowd without drawing too much attention. Spoiler alert, he failed. Ah, the hero of the floating cake. A voice called from a hovering news drone which zoomed around him in erratic loops. It seemed programmed to interview anyone in the vicinity, and Jax's knees were nearly knocked out from under him by its persistent circling. How does it feel to save a birthday and potentially the morale of our entire quadrant? Jax stumbled, flailing like a human trying to interpret alien Morse code with his feet. It feels sparkly, very sparkly. The drone beeped excitedly and recorded his statement. Somewhere nearby, Leora's ears twitched as she hid behind a stall selling gravity-bending balloons. "He's mine!" She shouted dramatically, and the drone immediately zoomed toward her, capturing footage of her mock scolding Jax, which would later be broadcast with commentary like, "A tiny diplomat keeps the hero in line." Leora pulled Jax along, and they began a series of errands that would normally be mundane but, in their hands, became a full-scale comedic adventure. First was the hover scooter race. Two scooters, one shaped like a teardrop, the other resembling a semi-sentient cucumber, stood at the edge of the marketplace. Leora hopped onto the teardrop, ears twitching with glee, and Jax hesitated before climbing on the cucumber. "Are these scooters even sentient?" he asked. "They disagree on whether the finish line exists," Leora replied, grinning. "And if you offend one, it might loop forever." She revved the teardrop, sending a jet of neon propulsion into a nearby holographic fountain, which exploded into holographic fish that flopped through the air with sound effects reminiscent of a slapstick comedy orchestra. Jax's scooter sputtered, whistled, and then refused to start, prompting him to kick it lightly. The cucumber shivered in indignation and launched them backward in a perfect arc, narrowly missing a floating vendor who was screaming at his malfunctioning price scanner. Leora's laughter rang out, high and melodic, while Jax clung to the handlebars, silently questioning all his life choices that had led him to racing sentient scooters in the middle of a chaotic intergalactic market. Next came the drones. A collection of sentient mini-drones, each with opinions about cake presentation, hovered around, demanding to be tested in a cake flight evaluation. Leora gave them all names on the spot. Spindle, Wiggle, and Beep, with no apparent logic. Jax was ordered to participate in a competitive game of Catch the Rogue Cake Sprinkle, in which the sprinkle, powered by micro-anti-gravity engines, zoomed around like a hyperactive comet. Every attempt Jax made ended with him tangled in a bundle of levitating ribbons, while Leora's ears quivered as she applauded his spectacular failures. At one point, he tripped over Spindle, who insisted on helping by spinning in unpredictable directions, sending Jax into a fountain that somehow turned into a shower of neon bubbles. Leora squealed in delight, her laughter causing a minor ripple in the local gravity field that sent a few unattended market carts tumbling gracefully into each other like synchronized swimmers. Amid the laughter and chaos, they stumbled upon a tiny crisis. A rogue anti-gravity cat that had escaped from the local pet bazaar and was now floating dangerously close to a stack of fragile interstellar vases. Leora's ears twitched sharply, alerting Jax to the approaching catastrophe. "We need to negotiate," she said seriously, as if she were a seasoned diplomat. The cat yawned, indifferent, then swirled around them like a miniature black hole with whiskers. Jax tried bribery, offering a piece of leftover holographic cake. The cat sniffed, flicked its tail, and rejected him. Leora sighed, then whispered something incomprehensible in her native tongue, and the cat immediately obeyed, floating gently back to the bazaar as if nothing had happened. By mid-afternoon, the duo had caused minor explosions in the bakery section, 3 temporary gravity anomalies and 1 full-scale confetti storm, all while gathering ingredients for what Leora insisted would be her official birthday feast. Jax, now coated in a suspicious layer of neon frosting, was secretly proud. He realized that while the market might have been chaotic and unpredictable, it was in these moments of absurdity that connections formed. Humans and aliens, scooters and drones, even rebellious gravity-defying cats, all were part of the same small universe. And in the middle of it, a little girl with extraordinarily long ears had become the center of a joyous, if slightly ridiculous, celebration. The day ended with Leora sitting atop a low-gravity bench, her ears twitching contentedly as she watched fireworks, a mix of holographic stars and chemical reactions that shimmered in ways humans couldn't properly describe. Jax sat beside her, exhausted, sticky, and quietly impressed by how a 5-year-old could command both gravity and laughter with such skill. "You know," he said, wiping frosting from his ear, "I think we may have just invented a new market sport." "What sport?" Leora asked, ears perking. "Falling gracefully into chaos while keeping everyone alive," Jax replied, grinning. "I'm calling it birthday acrobatics." Leora's laughter rang out again, bouncing off the walls of nearby buildings and reflecting in the floating puddles of neon light. Her ears twisted in ways that made Jax snort, realizing that the absurdity of the day was perfect. Somewhere between hover scooter races, sentient drones, rogue cats, and floating frosting, the bond between them had deepened. It wasn't just about a birthday anymore. It was about discovery, connection, and the unspoken promise of more adventures that would test their courage, humor, and ability to survive ridiculous situations. As night fell, the market began to settle, lights dimming to the steady glow of distant stars. Leora leaned against Jax, her ears twitching softly in contentment, and whispered, "Tomorrow we get the gravity jelly." Jax groaned dramatically. "Why do I feel like we're signing up for another chaos convention?" She grinned, "Because you are." And somewhere in the quiet hum of the market, amidst the floating confetti and lingering cake crumbs, the promise of more mischief, laughter, and interstellar chaos hung in the air, sparkling brighter than any zero-gravity firework could hope to match. The morning arrived with the peculiar sense that the entire market, and possibly the surrounding sectors, were holding their collective breath. The previous day's exploits had spread far and wide. The image of Leora, her tiny hands clutching a floating cake, ears twitching in gleeful defiance, had been shared across interstellar feeds, accompanied by commentary ranging from awe to outright disbelief. Hover billboards blinked with headlines like "Alien Girl Outsmarts Gravity and Human Hero," and "Cake Diplomacy, a Lesson for the Galaxy." Jax, who had survived frosting, confetti storms, and rogue cats, now found himself the reluctant center of attention, dodging drones that wanted interviews and sentient snack carts that demanded his autograph. As he navigated through the crowd, Leora tugged at his sleeve with a determined urgency. "Today is serious business," she announced, ears stiffening like radar dishes. "The bureaucrats are coming." "The bureaucrats?" Jax asked, wary. He had imagined alien bureaucrats as vaguely ominous floating figures in long robes, But he hadn't expected their arrival would include hovering briefcases that emitted passive-aggressive sighs and clipboards that beeped judgmentally whenever a candle wobbled. "They enforce everything," Leora said solemnly, whispering to a small floating drone. "Especially birthdays done incorrectly." Within the hour, the bureaucrats arrived, gliding in formation with a quiet authority that could dampen the joy of a supernova. Their faces were stern, expressionless, and slightly holographic, as if someone had modeled them after the ultimate parental figures in the galaxy. This celebration violates approximately 37 regulations concerning interspecies confectionery protocols, one said in a tone that suggested it had never laughed in its existence. Jack stepped forward, wiping residual frosting from his shirt. "Ah, hello, I promise it's all in good fun. We, loosely followed the law and gravity, mostly gravity." The bureaucrats did not laugh. They were not designed to laugh. One of them extended a hand and flicked a finger at the hovering cake. The frosting wavered as if sensing impending doom. Leora's ears twitched nervously. "Quick plan," she whispered urgently to Jax. "We need to distract them with fun." "Fun?" Jax asked deadpan. "I'm not sure they do fun." "They will if we make it look extremely serious," she said, eyes sparkling. "Follow me." What followed was a carefully orchestrated chaos of comic genius. Leora and Jax commandeered the drones, assigning each a task. One to project holographic confetti tornadoes, another to recite celebratory proclamations in the overly dramatic style of intergalactic opera, and Spindle, the most enthusiastic drone, was instructed to chase the bureaucrats in synchronized pirouettes. Jax himself engaged in the only tactic he knew, slapstick improvisation. He tripped over a low-gravity cart, collided with a balloon cluster, and somehow launched a rogue holographic cake into a perfect looping trajectory that spiraled around the bureaucrats' heads like a playful comet. The bureaucrats' stern expressions faltered ever so slightly when one of the floating cakes narrowly missed a clipboard, spinning it end over end in a dazzling display. Jax bowed elaborately, muttering, "We are merely testing interspecies reactions to gravity-defying desserts." Leora laughed, hopping in place, ears twitching in synchronized amusement, and pointed to a cluster of market-goers who had joined in with zero-gravity dance moves, turning the event into a spontaneous festival of absurdity. It took almost an hour, but gradually the bureaucrats' rigid composure began to crack. The floating confetti, holographic fireworks, and unintentionally comedic choreography proved irresistible, and the small cracks of amusement widened into subtle smiles. The eldest bureaucrat, a holographic figure named Varric, shifted his weight and a faint chuckle escaped, sounding almost like the soft hum of a star. "Perhaps," he said cautiously, "there is merit in unregulated joy." Leora's ears perked, bouncing in tiny arcs. Jax gave her a triumphant nod. Mission accomplished. Bureaucrats amused, cake intact, child thrilled, humanity vaguely competent. With the bureaucratic approval grudgingly granted, Leora's birthday festivities continued with a spectacular flourish. Zero-gravity jelly puddings spun lazily in midair, hover scooters performed impromptu races along neon rails, and Jax finally allowed himself to take a bite of the floating cake, which tasted of triumph, sugar, and a hint of interstellar mischief. By the time the sun, or whatever local star served that role, began to set, the market had settled into a quiet, satisfied hum. Jax leaned against a bench, frosting smudged on his face, eyes scanning the market filled with laughter and contentment. Leora clambered onto his shoulder, her ears twining around his neck affectionately as if to say, "You did good, human." "I did survive," he said, grinning, "mostly." She poked him with a tiny finger. "No, you helped, you cared. And that's more than surviving." Her words, simple and earnest, carried a weight that made Jax pause. He realized that the day had changed him, subtly but undeniably. He had entered the market as a reluctant bystander, expecting nothing more than to observe. He now understood the power of small acts, of compassion, creativity, and willingness to engage in absurdity, to bridge divides between species, generations, and galaxies. "Careful," he muttered, brushing confetti from his shoulder. "You're turning me into a soft-hearted hero type, dangerous for my reputation." Leora giggled, ears bouncing like springs, and whispered conspiratorially, "Good, that's the plan." The evening faded, and the market lights dimmed, leaving glowing neon traces in the slowly settling atmosphere. Jax watched as vendors packed up, drones hovered lazily, and small groups of humans